Well, thank you very much. My name's Sonny Magaña, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's actually an honor to be here. This is the second time I've been at Punahou, thanks to my first trip. I was invited by Lisa Stewart, who some of you know, and that was, I think, 5 years ago. So it's really an honor to be here. Interestingly, it seems like I'm the last thing in between you and cocktails and poo-poos. So I'll make this as entertaining as possible. You know, most of my work has been with at-risk students, and I've kind of come upon the notion of what is, instead of thinking about technology, my question always refers to what does technology allow kids to do that they cannot possibly do as well or as readily in its absence. And if we don't hold technology to that standard, we run the risk of being succumbed by geeks bearing gifts. We've got to be really careful about geeks bearing gifts. So I come to you as a teacher. I mean, I'm a simple teacher. I'm a biology and mathematics and Spanish and music and science teacher. So that, 'cause in an alternative school, you got to wear a lot of hats. You know, you got to cover FTE in a lot of different ways. So I covered a lot of content area. And we first started using technology back in the mid-'80s. One of the very first things that I did with a classroom of students, we sent emails to students in the Soviet Union when there was still a Soviet Union. And during a very tense 3 or 4 days during summer school, during August of 1991, when President Mikhail Gorbachev was kidnapped and his wife. Remember that political takeover, the military coup with the generals in the military kidnapped Gorbachev? They shut down every form of communication out of the Soviet Union at that point, except for the internet, because they didn't know about it. And Gorbachev created this free flow of information called Glasnost, in keeping with the notion of glasnost and openness and the free flow of ideas, which is a very democratic idea. Well, turns out if you know what you don't know can really harm you, and that's really what happened to the military leaders of that coup. And as word got out, public outcry and world pressure increased. And through email, my students and I saw the dismantling of the Soviet Union. So we not only witnessed history, we actually took part in the observation of history through an historic medium that had never before existed. So I still hold that as sort of a lodestone for my work with technology, because without that technology, my students could not have possibly had meaningful, timely, authentic communication with students and teachers in what was then the Soviet Union. We hold the same kind of mantle here at Promethean, where I serve as the head of global research. And I'm going to talk about research. I'm not going to talk about Promethean. So if you came to listen to a pitch about Promethean, you're going to be disappointed. If you came to hear something, a talk specifically about technology, I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed. What I am more interested in is impact and the resulting effect of interactive technologies on educational quality, student engagement, and academic achievement. But it's an open-ended book, actually. You have in your hands these active expression devices. I want to give you a quick primer on how to use it, and then I'm going to tell you to use it. You need to turn it on first by clicking on this button here, which is the circle with a line through it. And through the various phases I'm going to do, I'm going to ask you certain types of questions that are going to be multiple choice. So you'll have to select the button here on the side, which corresponds to the letter, which corresponds to your answer. Maybe some sorted questions. We're probably going to do some texting questions, where I'd like you to text in your answers. And you'll have a text field that opens up. So look at the faceplate that will change depending upon the question set that I ask you. All right, so the first question I have is, what is your highest educational priority? What are you the most interested in? Is it A, improving academic achievement, B, meeting the needs of all learners, C, improving instruction, D, realizing the value of previously purchased technology, E, saving time and money, or F, developing students' ability to collaborate, communicate, and contribute. So turn your active expressions on, select the letter which corresponds to your answer, and in this case, it'll just start registering. Okay, great. There's also a software version of this device that runs on iOS or Android devices that's available, so you don't have to have another device if you don't want to. Yeah, that's kind of cool.
That's mine.
Did that answer your question before you asked it?
No, I use it in my class.
All right. Okay, great. All right, everybody locked in your answers? Okay, I'm just going to ask if I want you to respond, or more people to respond. I'm just going to say no for now. All right, this group is really interested in collaboration, communication, critical thinking. Those are 21st century skills. All right. Nobody needs to save time and money. I don't know what that's indicative of. Okay, I'm not going to go there. You're not interested in improving academic achievement, but you are clearly interested in developing students' ability to be successful in the third millennium, where collaboration, communication, critical thinking, those are the indicators of success in a conceptual economy. I have another question. How do you learn best? How do you learn best? Do you learn best by lectures, by reading new information, by watching others, by doing stuff, talking things over, engaging multiple senses? How do you learn best?
Yeah.
How do you learn best? And these are responding. They're anonymously allocated, so I don't know who answers what. But in a classroom, I would want to have allocated to a child so I can track progress. All right, ready? Lock in your votes. We'll see who gets voted off the island. Okay, that is also an interesting bit of data. You all are interested in multiple senses and doing projects. So you guys are kinesthetic, you're visual, you're auditory, you're constructionist, you do things, that's how you learn best. For the 3 people that learn best by lectures, this is for you. For the rest of you, I'm sorry. Take a look at this image here for a moment. And what I'd like you to do is text in what you think this is. Talk to your group. I mean, talk to the person next to you. Collaborate a little bit. What do you think this is? And then text in what you think this is. You know, there's a version of these that are coming up with a 40 keyboard for us non-texters with non-dexterous opposable thumbs like me. Text in what you think it is. It's open.
Oh, I see. Oh, I see what you're doing. Yeah.
So this is where I usually play a little thinking music, reflection music. You can have a guitar. Next hero. Next one. Guitar hero. I know. I love that urgent optimism. That's a concept that really resonates with me. I don't know about you. Urgent optimism. I love it. How are we doing? Can I give you 30 more seconds? Okay. We'll count down. Okay, 30 seconds, you got. $20. I'm sensing closure behavior, so do you actually need these in the next 10 seconds? I don't think so. Okay, ready? All right. Now that was funny. All right, let's see. What do you think this is? I'm going to do what's called a word seed and seed these all. And let's see. We got. I did what's called a word seed. So what I can do is, let me do a background here. I've got an interesting color. So giant sneaky flower. I've got a stamen of a flower. Let me move this page here so I can Okay, so you can see these pictures. There you go. Okay, flower center, stamen of a flower, flower stamen, good. We got a very floral theme. Hair strand, interesting. Stamen of a flower, giant sticky flower, leaf, so that's very provocative. Plant flower, inside flower. All right, we got those on the hair. So what I'm doing is just taking your thoughts and I'm organizing them a little bit. This is a great way to stimulate some thinking, and stimulate the process of categorizing thoughts. Even though this is a simple exercise, what I'm literally able to do is manipulate and see your thoughts. So the process of making thinking visible in the learning process is very important to us. Because we know that when a teacher can have a window into a student's thinking process, you're more likely then to provide the right intervention at the right time for the right kid and close conceptual gaps, where misconceptions will trump good teaching every time. My friend Alan November, who's coming to Hawaii in September, says, common misconceptions, student misconceptions, trump good teaching every time. And I think he's right. Okay, so I'm going to move on because I'll actually answer what that was in just a moment. I work with the Promethean Education Strategy Group, and we're primarily interested in these educational themes, linking educational quality and increases in learning productivity to economic growth, and transforming education to a 21st century learning environment, providing more collaboration and personalization. These outer themes relate to each of those three inner themes: teacher effectiveness, curriculum development, curriculum and assessment assets that are digitized, data-driven decision-making, student achievement, and the education continuum, which is really each child's individual learning journey. Now, what I'm going to talk about mostly today is student achievement and teacher effectiveness, because that's what this research that we did is really based upon. We commissioned Dr. Robert Marzano back in 2008, to do independent research to study what is the effect of this technology on student learning. So let me play a quick video.
It's important to continually focus on education, to continually try to make it better, because that's the backbone of our society. It's the backbone of a country. I mean, it's what makes a country great or not great. Good technology, along with good training about how to use that technology, can have a pretty substantial effect, almost across the board. I became interested in the effects of interactive whiteboards probably 5 years ago. And I was in a school, and there was a teacher using an interactive whiteboard, and I had never seen it before, and I was mesmerized. I just couldn't believe the things this teacher was able to do and the engagement of the students, and decided on doing a study.
So, where I do get lots of rain.
We had 85 teachers. We asked them to use the interactive whiteboard in one class and not use it in another, and then teach the same content in both classes. They were to give a pre-test and a post-test and give the same test in both classes. The average effect, as I recall, was, I believe, about a 17 percentile point gain on the average. There were some cases where teachers just went off the charts. I mean, it wasn't a 17 percentile point gain, it was a 40-plus percentile point gain.
Anyone think of how you...
I can, right now, just vividly recall seeing videotapes of teacher with the technology and without, and the engagement was so much easier with the technology. That doesn't mean you can't get it without it, but it's so much more work, as opposed to having tools where, students can vote, they can see the results immediately. By definition, if you're asking all students to vote on an answer, more kids are thinking about the content. That's the thing that really provides the message that, hey, everybody's expecting good here, they're expecting good things out of all of you, and you can do it. When used properly, the interactive whiteboard actually makes good instructional strategies better. If we used what we know works, that we really could have a system where virtually every student could succeed. And I know that sounds pie in the sky, but I honestly think that is attainable. I hope I live long enough to see it all, but I think next 20 years, or hopefully less, are going to be really exciting.
And I agree with that premise. I think that
it's important to continually focus on education, to continually try to make it better. Because
there we go. I think it is going to be very exciting the next 20 years, particularly based upon the research evidence that we're gathering along the way. And for me, we put our active classroom, which isn't just the interactive whiteboard, but the learner response systems, the software, our professional development. We have an online learning community called Promethean Planet. Those were all combined to make one intervention, or what we call the independent variable. That's what was tested. It wasn't just a one-off piece of technology, but a whole solution, which is we call the active classroom. It's not a product; it's more of a concept. And the concept is an interactive environment that takes all of these components and builds them into a learning environment for students. We started the research project in 2008, and then we did it again in the 2009-2010 school year. And here's what he found. The results were that the effect size was 0.41 standard deviations. In other words, the students in the treatment group that used the active classroom outperformed the students in the control group who were learning in a traditional way by 0.41 standard deviations. Let me go back to the way the methodology was designed. There were quite a number of teachers and students, so I'll get to in a moment, but a teacher would teach a lesson within a unit of study. The same teacher would create a pre and post test, and with a treatment group, the teacher taught the lesson using the active classroom. Exact same teacher, exact same content, exact same pre and post test, different set of students were taught in the control group, and then the independent variable, the active classroom, was not used. So that's how he did an analysis of covariance, which is the two different variables or two different groups, the control group and the treatment group. He translated that effect size into a percentile mean, which is an average effect size. So on average, the active classroom was caused an average 16 percentile gain. Given the data and given the variables that we had, there was a 16 percentile gain that the treatment group had over the control group. There's a fail-safe number as well, which is the number of studies that would have to be done to disprove this. This is a standard calculation for statistics that he applied, and you'd have to do 5,240 of the exact same studies to have that would show either a negative effect or no effect to make this number go down. So that means these results are very, very stable. And Dr. Marzano then inferred that even if we grew the sample size larger than it was, you'd still get about a 16 percentile gain on average. The scope was something that was also significant because we had, I think, 5,000 students in the study. So it's a nice large sample size. 5,000 is a really big sample size. There was K through 12, all subject areas. So language arts, math, science, social studies. And there were 26 states that were involved, 76 schools. So it was a really wide and varied sample. Large urban school districts, suburban school districts, rural school districts. We had about 10% of the students were IDEA or special needs students, a percentage that sort of reflected the national average. So what we found is what we're calling this active classroom effect. And to give you a visual representation, if you were to take a normally distributed traditional classroom, regardless of the grade band, content area, or teacher experience level, you put this active classroom in place, you create a new population that's distributed on average by a 16 percentile point delta. So that means it's like a high tide that floats all boats, because the average effect size is right here in the mean, right in the middle. A percentile is ranking of students out of 100. It's not a percentage game. But it's also, it's still a little bit of a tricky concept of percentile point gain. So unbeknownst to us, a guy named Dr. Gene Glass, who's the executive director of the National Education Policy Center, and the guy who invented meta-analysis, or the process that Dr. Marzano used, independently, completely independently of us, unsolicited by us, did an interpretation. And he said, a way of phrasing the findings is that a class employing this technology, the active classroom, would gain 12 months achievement in a 9-month school year. Now that's pretty significant. I mean, a 60 percentile gain is really significant. But then you put this notion of time and productivity, and that's a pretty phenomenal gain. What it means, if we apply that, is that students learning in an active classroom would, on average, gain 4 years of achievement in 3 school years. That could be parlayed over or extrapolated over the course of many years. It would look like this. This is the average achievement with the active classroom, and it grades the average achievement without it. On the x-axis, you have academic years, and the y-axis, you have years achievement. So in 3 years, kids would gain, on average, 4 academic years, if we apply that same mathematical perspective. They'd gain 12 months of achievement in a 9-month school year. In 6 years, they would gain 9. In 9 years, they'd gain 12 years of academic achievement. That's a phenomenal growth in learning productivity. And we're testing this out in a longitudinal way because we know that this is a process, and we're getting at answers, but we have more questions than we have answers. And that's the whole point of research anyway, is to really generate good questions, approach some answers, and look at trends and patterns. Now, what's even more interesting, we thought, than the average effect size, because a lot of people think that average effect size is the end-all, be-all. That's what you look for. Not to us. What was more interesting was to study those teachers that got a much greater gain than the average. What were they doing? What were the instructional practices that they were engaged in that allowed them to get 40-plus percentile gain in academic achievement? And that's when Marzano and his team analyzed the videotapes, because teachers were also videotaped in the treatment and the control group. And he found that there were 6 instructional strategies that were all highly correlated and that were readily evident amongst those teachers that had extremely high gains in their effect size. Chunking, scaffolding, pacing of instruction, monitoring student progress, clarity of content, and response rates. Those were the strategies that those teachers were engaged in that were in the very high end of the effect size range. So let me break that down a little bit and talk about each. Chunking is really essentially to take a very large, complex idea and break it down into manageable chunks or bites. Now this is in the process of direct instruction when students are being introduced to new knowledge for the first time. How are they going to be effectively interacting with new knowledge? So when that new knowledge is chunked and that the chunks are manageable and easier to identify and to make meaning from. The second is scaffolding, so that those chunks are arranged in such a way that when a child understands the first chunk, that helps them understand the second chunk. The second chunk leads to a better understanding of the third chunk. So they're sequential in a sort of scaffolded or tiered way. You got to pace your instruction, so you're not going too fast, you're not going too slow, you're going at the right speed, so that students can interact and build and test their tentative hypotheses on the fly, individually, and in aggregate using these learner response systems so everybody can see how everyone else is thinking. And they pace their instruction by monitoring student progress. With the absence of this technology, when we are assessing how well kids are following us, we're really taking our best guess. Or we might say this: raise your hand if you don't understand. Or who doesn't follow? Who doesn't follow? So, you're probably not going to get a lot of accuracy with that. The next one is clarity of content. Believe it or not, this is actually a slide from a PowerPoint on the roadmap to victory in Afghanistan. I don't get it. But that was actually a Department of Military PowerPoint slide that showed not a lot of clarity. So you have to make sure that your content is really clear, that your learning objectives are really clear, and that students can respond. And finally, the response rates. Let me give you an example. Tell me what your name is, Miss? Marcia. If I were in a class teaching my biology class, I'd say, Marcia, you know, last week we did a lesson on cell permeability. Could you tell me the difference between active and passive transport? Now, have I got Marcia's attention?
Yes.
Is she engaged? Marcia's engaged. And what is your name?
Terry.
Terry. Is Terry engaged? No, Terry's thinking, my God, I'm glad we're not Marcia. I can only have a conversation with one kid at a time. That, you know, a kid in the figurative sense, but we're all children in the large sense. So I can only have a conversation with one person at a time. Everyone else is thinking, man, he's right-handed, so I know he's going to go to this side of the room. So, these guys are all taking a break. They're thinking about what's going to happen tomorrow afternoon. I know the breaks, there's swell coming in. There's all kinds of things that are distracting us. All kinds of things that are demanding our immediate attention. But with these devices, every student can respond to questions. And so, not just in theory, but in practicality, if you have a 100% response rate, every kid is thinking about the question. Every kid is responding. And then you can take those responses and do something with it. And that's, we think, what was really at work here in some school called the Golden Avenue. where we're doing a longitudinal study. Let me give you a little bit of background on Golden Avenue. They're a high needs school district in Southern California. They have about 92% Title I students, very high free and reduced lunch, highly diverse, high ELL population, and a high population of students that are highly mobile, which is defined as students that move at least twice a year. So these kids have got every social, economic disadvantage working against them. And yet, we did some work with them in the 2010 school year, and this is the school's academic performance index. In California, an 800 is considered adequate progress. And so since 2005, when this was tracked, they had not broken that barrier. So for 5 years, they had not made adequate yearly progress. In the state of California, a public school that doesn't make adequate yearly progress has all sorts of draconian things that could come into play. The teachers can be let go. The principal could lose their job. The school could be shut down, taken over by the state, mandated that it's taken over by the state, and gutted and rebuilt. But there were great teachers doing great things with these kids, but these kids just had all sorts of disadvantages. We put in our systems in the 2009-2010 school year, and there's an immediate spike, so they made academic performance for the first time. But more interestingly, their proficiency in one of the most challenging subjects, mathematics, was really interesting. They had a huge gain. They went from just over 51% of their class, K through 6, proficient in math, to just about 69, almost 70% proficient. What's even more interesting is when that data was broken down based upon ethnicity and the disaggregation of student populations. Now, in our country, we clearly have a digital divide. We have a divide between the haves and the have-nots, and we have an academic divide. So the achievement gap clearly falls along socioeconomic lines. What's really interesting about this data from 2005 in purple, 2009 in blue, and 2010 in green is the massive gains among these populations of learners that are historically been disenfranchised and challenged. African American kids in school went from 40% proficient to over 75% proficient. That is a phenomenal gain in academic achievement. Latino kids also had pretty significant gains. English language learners showed significant gains. All populations of learners showed gains. The kids that needed the most showed the most gains. There's several things at work here, obviously. We had a dynamic principal who was just a visionary teacher. The teachers were phenomenal. But they agreed that the input of this particular technology led to huge increases in student achievement by closing what they call the engagement gap. And that's where the magic is. That's where the magic is, I think. This is a math proficiency bands for the school. And as you can see, very few students were in this deep red, which was far below basic. So that's another way of looking at some really tremendous gains in math proficiency in this school. Now, it's quite possible that this was just a flash in the pan. This was just, there was the novelty of this technology which led to such gains. So we did the same thing for the 2010-2011 school year. And these are the results of the California High Stakes Standardized Test, the CBAT test. We're going to get those results in August. And we're helping Lemon Grove publish a research study that will track these kids for 2 years in a row and see if there's a sustainability. And we're not just going to do it for 2 years. We're going to do it for 5 years or 7 years or however long we're still working with them. Because that's what will I think, provide legs. It'll be really difficult to argue against data that, like this, in various locations with various populations of students, that's sustainable over time. But they've come up with a really amazing approach to solving a national dilemma that we have, which is the achievement gap, by focusing on the engagement gap. Making sure kids are fully engaged in a multi-sensory way. And in order to do that, they're focusing on the teaching gap. Closing the teaching gap and giving teachers tools that make it very easy for them to teach in an engaging way. And I think there's real magic in that. The big question is why? What's going on? What's happening inside these kids' heads that's creating such remarkable changes in their learning? And I'm going to now go into a theoretical mode. and say, well, here's what I think. Here's my theory for why that is. If you haven't read this book, Richard Mayer, on multimedia learning, he does a lot of work. He's actually one of the founders of this notion of multimedia engagement in the learning process. And he said that we learn better with words and pictures than with words alone. That's just the way it is. When we stimulate our visual sense, as well as our auditory literal sense, learning improves. And he has study after study which underscores this finding. There's a guy named John Medina. Have you read this book? Brain Rules? If you haven't, go out and get it. Go and get it right away. It's a great read. He's very funny, very engaging. He was actually the keynote at this year's ISTE conference, if some of you are there, the International Society for Technology and Education. He has a really interesting perspective. And he comes up to the same conclusions as Mayer and others, but he's a molecular biologist. So he studies brain tissue. He studies the living tissue, the physiology of neurons, and identifies what are those things which stimulate the brain. So he has sort of an inside-out perspective, whilst behavioral psychologists are looking at learning behaviors. We have an outside-in perspective. He's actually looking at the very stuff through which meaning and understanding and what it is to be human is based upon. What he says is that learning improves when multiple senses are engaged. You responded in the same way, didn't you? When I asked you how you learn best, right? You said that you learn best by doing things over, by engaging multiple senses. That's not uncommon. That's how we all learn. That's how we all learn best. And there's a reason behind it. It's an evolutionary reason. And this is what I felt so fascinating. Medina says that the brain uses 50% of its capacity. 50% of the human brain capacity is used to process visual information. Not just static images, but movement, texture, foreground, background, color variations, all these patterns in visual perspective. That's what taxes our noodle more than anything else, is vision. So he suggests what we should be doing in classrooms is developing visual cogitation, more visual stimulation. Non-linguistic representations, one of Marzano's instructional strategies that work. Similarities and differences. Visual reasoning, spatial prompts, visual representations of ideas. Because our brains will remember, and that information will go from working knowledge to long-term knowledge and to attention. We've got to get through the attention first to get into working memory and then long-term memory. And vision is the input. That's the throughput road to a deeper brain function and higher levels of achievement. So we think that that's really what's going on. Medina says this is an evolutionary process. Back when we lived here on the plains of Serengeti, those of our primogenitors that didn't discern in the grass one of these became lunch and didn't live long enough to pass on their genetic material. So this is it's a very basic part of our evolutionary heritage, is the ability to process visual patterns. It's built on survival. If we don't do it, we don't survive. And that's a real clue to unlocking some of the mysteries of supporting the realization of student learning potential. I think that's just fascinating. So again, vision trumps all other senses. If you do nothing else in your classrooms, add more of a visual component in your lessons, in your activities, in your work with students, and you'll see increases in student achievement. I think that it actually goes a bit deeper than that, and this is a concept that I've been working on with, for some time on pattern literacy. And this is my statement. I think pattern literacy is the foundation upon which all knowledge is constructed. Our brains are wired to recognize patterns. Visual patterns, auditory patterns, kinesthetic patterns, patterns upon patterns, in ever-increasing spirals of complexity. The more attuned we are to recognizing the role of pattern literacy in the learning process, the more effective we'll be as instructors, I think. And why not use more of our senses in the work of eliciting greater understanding from our students? And again, it's all based upon brain research. This is the ubicación de las habilidades cognitivas en el cerebro humano. Ven esta clase. Entonces, aquí, en el hemisferio izquierdo, es donde tenemos aprendizaje por análisis. con procesos secuenciales y graduales, con habilidades lógicas y discursivas, primeramente con auditiva, verbal, motor. Pero aquí en el hemisferio derecho, en el otro lado del cerebro humano, aprendizamos con intuitivo, con global, sintético, procesos simultáneos, habilidades visoespaciales y estereotipos de lenguaje. When we right. Sí. When we just teach in an auditory way, we're stimulating one part of the brain, the temporal lobes. When we teach in a visual way, we're stimulating the occipital lobes. When we teach in a way that is visual, auditory, and kinesthetic, we're stimulating more of the brain's capacity. We literally are stimulating the development of more of these. Neurosynaptic connections. Come on, let's hear for neurosynaptic connections. Who got it? That's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. It's the neurosynaptic connection development that we know from brain research. That's where learning takes place. That's where learning takes place. And children who receive multisensory stimulation at an early age construct billions more of these than those who don't. You know, there's a window of time in the cognitive development of human beings from about birth to age 9, 10, it varies from time to time, where we've got trillions of neurosynaptic tendrils that are just wriggling around in our brains, waiting for some information to glom onto. That's why we got to teach language in preschool, in kindergarten, in first grade. Why do we wait until high school to teach a second or tertiary or third language? By then, that window of opportunity to speak a secondary or tertiary language as a near-native speaker is effectively shut. We need to do more in those early formative years because that's what kids are clamoring for. Anybody who has kids or any teacher knows, you know, during those formative years from birth till about 7 or 6 or 8 or so, learning is just a wondrous journey for kids. Everything is about learning. When these kids develop more neurosynaptic connections, they're literally developing greater intellectual curiosity, capacity, neurological ability, and motor effectiveness, and effective skills. That's literally what's happening. So why not stimulate more of the new? All right, let me ask you a question. I want you to take a look at this picture, and I want you to text in a fact about this picture. I'm going to turn on your active expressions, and I'd like you to text in. Let me just make sure I've got my... hang on just 1 second. I want to see what my text looks like. Okay, I'm good. Okay, sorry, it's on now. Text in one fact about this picture. Everybody can see? This is where I need that reflection music. No right or wrong answer. No right or wrong answer. Ah, the sound reflection. You can see.
Is there a button new?
Yes. No one.
Okay. No, I wanted to erase one letter. It's okay.
Plenty of time. One fact.
No, we're not going to tell you about it. We're going to steal my servant. Tell us.
Can I give you 30 seconds? Take as much time as you want.
Sorry, yes.
makes a great drinking game, by the way. Not to make you feel bad, but we gave these devices to kindergarten or first graders in Chicago public schools, and they're like texting full sentences in like 30 seconds. But that's because they're the texting generation. So we've got another version of these that's coming out with a QWERTY keyboard. So the full QWERTY keyboard, so that you don't have to text. So that'll be awesome. And the Android device and iOS app that will be.
So will you be coming out with a web-based one?
That is going to be web-based. So you can be on any.
No, without having to access the server.
Oh.
Totally web-based.
I'll have to check and see. We do need a server at the moment for the iOS ones. Yeah. But then you could have any of these devices. You could have an iOS device, an Android device, one of these devices, all in the same section. And there's going to be no texting because you're using the local network. Yeah, so you're not incurring any texting fees for that. So. All right, I'm going to say 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, lock in your votes. Let's see what you said. Okay, child labor, the floor is covered with trash. Young girl standing by rows of machines, black and white. I'm going to do another word seed and move these all in here. And let's move to let's move this image, and I'm going to adjust your there are now child labor laws in the U.S. Okay, that's a fact, but it's interesting how you got that from the picture. Old. Okay, yeah, I'm going to say that's a fact. Industrial. Okay. Wait, do we know it's industrial? Or is that an inference? I know child labor. Do we know it's child labor, or is it an inference? This picture demonstrates one-point perspective. Okay. This person is young. Yeah, that's a fact. That's easy. Girl is alone. Okay. Weaving factory. Do we know it's a fact? Did we infer? It's not in color. Okay, that's a fact. Child abuse. Child labor textile. The point is that I can, again, manipulate your thoughts and manipulate your artifacts of your thoughts. Not your thoughts, but thought artifacts. That's really powerful, and doing it in a collaborative way. Turns out, this is a textile mill, and this was an image of child labor. In our country, in Congress, numerous research reports were provided to Congress lobbying to enact child labor laws. But it wasn't until images like these were provided to Congress that the realities, the stark realities of child labor were made evident, and child labor laws were passed. That's the power of visual stimulation and visual prompts and thinking that enacted child labor laws. So those of you that inferred, you were correct, but even though I asked you to do a fact, that's okay. I'm going to round up by giving you sort of a quick essay of various research that moves us and has developed our thinking. John Bransford from the University of Washington did a fabulous study called Brain, Mind, Experience in School, wrote a book about it. There's also a companion study guide, which is just, it should be essential reading for any kind of professional work groups. And what he suggests in his research is that feedback and active evaluation of learning furthers students' understanding and skill development. The name is Bransford, B-R-A-N-S-F-O-R-D. The title of the research study was How People Learn, is the main study. The secondary title is Brain, Mind, Experience in School. So getting that feedback is a critical component to the learning process, and one of the things we think that contributed to that very large effect size of the active classroom. I'm going to pass this for a moment because we're running out of time. I'm just going to go right to some more ideas. There's a guy named Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi that wrote a book called Flow. Anybody read Flow? Yeah, fantastic. He's the first psychologist to study positive attributes of human endeavor. That's a hell of a statement. What we know about human psychology, we know from what doesn't work, from dysfunction. That's not as powerful a roadmap to unlocking human potential as studying function. And not just function, but optimal function. And that's what Csikszentmihalyi did. He studied the work of artists, musicians, athletes, humans in the peak of creative performance, and came up with indicants of what he calls a flow experience. It's too bad Dr. Long wasn't here because in many cases, when kids are so enwrapped in a game, they're in a flow experience. And there are certain conditions which make a flow experience. One is that the challenge of the activity is just slightly beyond the capacity of the doer of that activity. It's just hard enough to make the experience worth doing for its own sake. There's a dilation of time. It seems like you're spending 20 minutes on something and 2 hours have gone by. There's immediate feedback. The doer knows exactly how well he or she is doing at the task at every single moment with an instantaneousness that allows for the modification of thinking and behavior on the fly. So those are some of those conditions. But what he said is that direct and immediate feedback. You need to know how well you're doing while you're doing it. Not weeks or hours or months or years later. While you're doing it. That's backed up by a great book by Dr. John Hattie, who is sort of like the grandfather of meta-analysis. He did 800 meta-analyses relating to achievement. And this book was just published, Visible Learning. And he said what we need to do in education is provide dollops of feedback, not from the teacher to the student, but from the student to the teacher, the student to other students, and the students to themselves, to engage in the process of reflection and metacognition during the instructional moment. So closing feedback loops is a big part of this. I think it's a big part of why we got teachers that were getting 40+ percentile gain. Can you imagine if we had a 40 percentile gain among the most challenging populations of learners in our country? You know what that would do to our economy? It's really phenomenal, isn't it? All right, here's one last thing I'm going to leave you with, and then I want to do a quick little activity. This is some work I'm doing at the moment with Dr. Marzano called the feedback gap. And the feedback gap is, anybody here from our competitors? Anybody? Anybody? Raise your hand. The feedback gap, I'm just kidding. The feedback gap is what we define as the dilation of time, the time gap between when a child does an assessment experience and when they get the results of that assessment experience. So summative assessments rank very high in the time delay category, so they rank very, very low in the reflective metacognitive value category. Formative assessment is kind of in the middle. The time delay may be hours or days, but real-time feedback, when you get that instantaneous feedback, it happens in seconds. So that has the highest metacognitive value. Let me tell you a little bit about this action research and then all of this activity. We're looking for people to engage in action research with us. So if you're interested in it, action research is a process of continuous observation, cycles of reflection, planning, action, observation, leading to further reflection. You want to test, what is the effect of something, of a technology? And we need to do this across our country because our Congress seems to think that technology does not have a role in the education process. It's not important. And I think in the 21st century, it is as important as teachers, textbooks, notebooks, pencils and paper, computers. Technology, the computers need to have a role as a part of the base of education. So I implore you to consider engaging in this ongoing research, action research journey with us by engaging in continuous process. So you can contact me if you want to get involved in some more information about that. I'm going to see if this will fire up, and there you go. But this is an activity that I just wanted to play around with. You've got this APEC Hawaii. This is a new app. By the way, this is our new 500 series board that's gesture and multiple input. What I'd like you to do is let's take this idea of APEC Hawaii. I'm going to start over here. Wrong one. That's coming to Hawaii, I just wanted to see what our where's it? Oh, here it is. Okay. What I'd like you to do is text in your first thoughts when you see the term APEC Hawaii, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation that's coming to Hawaii in November. Text in what you think about that in our new app. We're going to start a word seed. So open up your active expression devices. I think I'm still on. There. Whoops. Is it starting?
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Great. Yeah, so just text in whatever. We have a word, a string of words, whatever you think. When you think of APEC Hawaii. I must have started already. Okay, there you go. This is a new app that runs on this 500 board. Congested.
Traffic.
Nope. Oh. I think on this beta there might be, there's not going to be, there's going to be like 150 character limit. Teaching words. Okay, interesting. Security nightmare, economic boost visitors. Okay. I just wanted to see. All right. Well, we've got a lot of thoughts here. All right. Hiding the homeless. Oh, okay. Need to look up. Fair enough. Well, this one again. This is a new device that allows us to sort of play around with mass collaboration. So I can see this now. I can manipulate these. But what's really cool about this technology is it allows me to do more than one single input. I can have actually up to 4 touch points. So I can do that. So with this technology, I got to have 4 touch points and 4 individuals coming up here and working on this. And let's see, I can then take this and organize it. Exciting, congested, optimistic, millions, Barack Obama. Okay. If there's something that doesn't really fit, I can adjust it as well. So innovation, politicians. Sounds like OPEC. Okay, I don't know what that means, so I'm just going to get rid of it. I'm just going to have to say I know. Well, I don't know who you are. Economics. Okay, that sort of sums it all up then, doesn't it, for me? Exciting, old, security nightmare. All right. Well, this is one of the new tools that we have to sort of play around with collaboration and to create some sort of friendly controversy, which can then stimulate thinking. So to use these things is more than just an assessment device. Right. Well, listen, I'm running out of time, and so I'm afraid if you have any questions, I'll be around later. Thank you very much, Ted and Douglas, for inviting me for Punahou. And what was the image? Oh, yes. That's what you're waiting for. As it turns out, interestingly enough, this image was. Oh, have you been to Newgrange? I was just there a couple months ago. Yeah, Newgrange is a pretty incredible place. What that image was the largest flower in the world, the corpse flower, which had bloomed just recently at the University of Washington. People were lined up around the block to stick their nose and smell the stink of a dead corpse. That's what because it's a carnivorous flower that attracts bugs by emitting an odor of a rotting corpse. But there's not a lot to do in Seattle, so it was a really fun time to take a date. Hey, honey, let's go smell this. Listen, thanks for your time. My name's Sonny.